And here you thought I was just another blonde-headed bimbo. Well, the joke's on you. I'm not even a real blonde. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another video where I am discussing a novelization of Batman content, that being Harley Quinn Mad Love. In this video, I will be discussing the 3 iterations of this story, that being the original comic by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, the Batman animated series episode with the same title, as well as this recently published novelization of the story by Paul Dini and Pat Cadigan. So the first iteration of the story, and the first time the story was published, was in Batman Harley Quinn Mad Love, which was originally published in 1993. My version that I own is a compilation with other Batman the Animated Series stories also included. And this story was written by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and highlights the backstory for Harley Quinn. Now, as most people know, Harley Quinn was a character first introduced in the 1992 Batman the Animated Series show, and not a lot of her backstory was explained. There were a few points that were mentioned in various episodes, including that she used to be a psychiatrist and that she fell in love with the Joker. And this short comic eventually describes her backstory and how she became obsessed with the Joker and began working with him. So the story involves her early life, and then starting her job at Arkham Asylum, where she then begins to study the Joker and falls for a lot of his lies. And then in the present, she tries to enact a plan to get rid of Batman without Joker's permission, and the consequences of that, and a lot of description of why she is the way she is. It is a brilliant story, brilliantly executed, and a wonderful explanation of who Harley Quinn is and how she got here. So first I will show the night that I both read the comic and rewatched the television episode.
Sloppy, predictable. You're losing your edge.
Excuse me, but the teeth were my idea. So's this! Oh, come on, Puddin'. Don't you want to rev up your Harley? Vroom, vroom.
Hello, just a quick update to say I have finished my tandem reading and viewing of Batman Mad Love by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. Hi, Selena. I have just finished that. I just wanted to say that this is basically a very, very similar adaptation, except for this little set piece where it is Bruce who introduces the idea of Harley Quinn always have being a bad person, and then describes that she was a gymnast and then cheated in school to get good grades. I'm glad that the television episode did not include that, and the television episode frames it as Harley wondering to herself when everything went wrong between her and the Joker, and I like that framing device a lot better. We stick to Harley for most of the episode. We only see Batman in connection to the plot when he gets captured, so I prefer that aspect for the TV episode. Plus, when you are reading the comic, you can't hear anyone else other than Arlene Sorkin, Kevin Conroy, and Mark Hamill as all of the distinctive characters. It is impossible. And having them do essentially reading the comic word for word for the episode was just the perfect way to adapt the episode. So I really enjoyed the episode. I really enjoyed rereading the comic, and I can't wait to start the novelization and see the similarities and differences between it, because I know Paul Dini is a credited author. So I don't know if he contributed any writing or if it is just in his name because of some of the elements that are adapted. So we'll see. The television episode for Mad Love came out with the New Batman Adventures rename of Batman the Animated Series. That series came out in 1997 after a bit of a hiatus from the original Batman the Animated Series. And with this new reiteration, there was a heavier focus on the Bat family rather than just Batman, as well as a few highly debated redesigns of the characters. And fun fact, the actual redesign of the Joker was based on a few comic panels from this comic where you don't fully see Joker's eyes. They are just rendered in white, and that is a contributor for the redesign of the Joker. A lot of those redesigns were to streamline the animation. Thankfully, Harley was hardly changed. The television episode came out in 1999, so that's 6 years after the comic was published, and that allowed them to do a few differences in the episode, both to make it appropriate for children and to change out the layout of how the story was told. As I said in my earlier clips, I much prefer Harley reflecting on herself and where she went wrong, rather than having Batman just explain to Alfred that she's always been a bad kid, and it only made sense that she was connected to the Joker in that way. Ultimately, I think it is just a perfect adaptation of the comic. Sometimes it is line for line, but of course I really, really enjoyed Mark Hamill's ad-lib of "May the floss be with you," because only he could get away with that. They couldn't put that in the comic. That's too referencey, but having Luke Skywalker, say that as the Joker, perfect. I really, really enjoyed that, and I think it is a brilliantly acted episode. All of the voice actors are at the top of their game, and I'm so glad that they were able to adapt the comic so well. So for both the comic adaptation as well as the television episode, that is a 5-star from me. I love both of these works equally, and I think that they're both fantastic. Now that brings us to this novelization of the Mad Love story, which was published in 2019, and it is by Pat Cadigan, as well as having contributions from Paul Dini. That being, it brings in a lot of the story as well as a few lines from the original Mad Love comic and television episode. So he gets credited as such, and I'm sure he was supervising the story as well. Now, this story is vastly different from the original comic and television episode. Of course, that has to do with having to put out a novel-length story, so there is a lot of backstory involved, a lot of changes involved, and a lot of modernization involved. I won't go too far into spoiling the book, but if you do know the Mad Love story, you know that it carries out almost the exact same way, but there's a few additions in this novel. So this novel is mostly from Harley Quinn's perspective, and it details a little bit of her life growing up and how she ultimately studied to become a psychiatrist and how she got her job at Arkham. There are a lot of additions, including her early work in Arkham where she tried to make a difference. They have a subplot where she tries to bring a lot of the female patients into group therapy and try to help them out that way. It brings in a connection to Poison Ivy, Pamela Isley, and also brings in a few deep cut characters from the Batman comics, including March Harriet, Mary Louise Doll, Baby Doll, and Meg Pie as well. Now, that subplot was brought in towards the end, so it did have a purpose, and I thought that it was cute that it was kind of doing a proto Gotham City Sirens in that they were trying to bring a lot of the female villains together, even though Harley was not yet a villain. The story then details a lot of the process where she begins to study the Joker, he begins to manipulate her, and she eventually breaks him out, and the plot of Mad Love begins. The retelling of Mad Love takes place at about chapter 26, which is in the last third of the novel, so there is a lot of new additions that a lot of readers may find very interesting in this novel. I found it to be a very unique way to retell the story, and I thought ultimately that this was pretty good. However, I do have a few critiques of it. The first point is just a small point. I didn't like the very, very modern take of this story. Like when Harley is a child, it is described that a character pulls out their cell phone and takes a picture of her. Now, I know that there were some camera phones in the early to mid 2000s, but to me that seems very much like a smartphone kind of thing, and I don't know how that lines up with the timeline of Harley's age and the rest of the characters as well. So that's just a small point. There's also a few mentions of social media that I didn't really like. I just think that that takes it out of the story, especially since the original comic and television episode come from a very timeless kind of era, both in the animation and in the comic. Next, I found that the story tends to repeat itself, tends to reiterate the exact same points, and there is a lot of heavy thinking in this novel that I call kind of like the personal opinionated essay or the brainstorm thought process, where a character goes through every single possible point of contention in their own head mentally and arguing with themselves essentially before coming to a point. Yes, you will do some inner monologue arguing with yourself during difficult decisions, but you're not going to do 6 pages worth of convincing yourself of a point using every single thought process in linear fashion. I just think that that writing is just a little bit lazy and a little bit boring to read because you can just make a rash decision on a dime instead of going through every single plot like point of contention. I also found that the focus on Joan Leland, that being one of the doctors at Arkham, who is in the original comic and episode, I just find that to be a little bit odd as well. There was a lot of focus on her, and her also repeating the exact same points that Harley is possibly way in over her head when it comes to treating the patients and later the Joker. Additionally, there's a lot of focus on very, very minor characters that ultimately end up meaning nothing. We get a lot of details about their life and about their personality, even though they hardly do a damn thing in the story, and I just thought that that was a little bit of a waste of time. I also thought that Cadigan's writing of Batman was not accurate, at least to the Batman the Animated Series Batman. He was making a few too many jokes, and I just didn't like the way he thought in his inner monologue. That being said, I thought that the writing of the Joker was very well done, and the process of him manipulating Harley. And once we get to the Mad Love plotline, I think that that is pretty standard and pretty accurate to the original tale. However, the book has to add a few changes to the words and a few changes to the dialogue, and I understand you have to do that for the sake of adaptation as well as to make this more of an original tale, but I just thought that it was making it a bit too convoluted, a little bit too clunky, while Paul Dini's writing, especially for television, is spot on perfect and doesn't really need to be added to or changed. This was also a fast read as well, so I really enjoyed it for what it was. While I had a few issues with it, I ultimately think it was a very fun way to expand a little bit further on the Mad Love story without making too many heavy changes that I found to be inappropriate, boring, or flat out something I disagree with. So I thought this was a very cute little story for what it was, and a fun way to add to the original story. Even though I think that that original story is pretty succinct and perfect, this didn't upset me too much. So this is getting a 3-star from me. So that is it. That is my reread of the original Mad Love comic, my rewatch of the original Mad Love episode, and my first time reading this Harley Quinn Mad Love adaptation. I had a lot of fun doing this. I really like returning to classic comics and classic television episodes in order to review something completely new. So let me know in the comments if there's any other form of Batman adaptation I should look at. I understand there's also a Killing Joke novelization from the same publisher, but I'm a bit hesitant to get into that one because I know it's heavily controversial, both the original comic, the animated film, and possibly that novel. But let me know in the comments if there's any other form of Batman adaptation that you would like to see me discuss. I had a lot of fun with this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye, Puddin'!